Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to this sensitization session for the Department of Human Resources Management and Administration, Corporate Headquarters, Abuja. Basically, the reason I had to call for this program is we have a circular from the Office of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation on the Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plan 2021 to 2025. And we were supposed to inform other members of staff on this program, the nature of the program, and the expected benefits of the program. So I thought it wise that as admin officers and saddled with the responsibility of interpreting the policy of government to other members of staff, including management, it is very important for us in-house to have an idea, have an understanding of what the program looks like. So essentially, it's not as if we are going to go into a very elaborate description of the program. It's not something that we can afford under this session, because we are talking about 111 pages, 111-page document prepared by the Office of the Head of the Civil Service under the leadership of Dr. Mrs. Yemi Eson Folúṣadé. So, by way of starting, you know that the civil service has always had reforms, have an issue trying to change the way they do things in order to enhance productivity and service delivery. And that is the whole idea, of even the current program, which is, like I said before, called Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plan 25 for short. Is talking about a period of implementing a change agenda that is from 2021 to 2025. So the concept is that things have always been done in a particular way, but no results have been achieved. So there was this need to change the pattern of doing things, so as to conform to international best practices. The world is always evolving, into different modes terms of service delivery. Even if you are talking about manufacturing sector, they always want to change the way of doing things in order to enhance their productivity. As a matter of fact, nations of the world that have made it, nations of the world that have improved, places like Singapore, Malaysia, the Asian, countries, there are two important things that they have always looked at: the manufacturing sector and the service sector, because these are the two things that will improve the economy of the nations of the world. So if you can sort out these two aspects, then you are good to go. So the Federal Civil Service is an aspect of the nation's economy because it has to do with service delivery. You are constantly dealing with the clientele. You are constantly dealing with customers, if I may put it that way. There are people who come seeking for interpretation of government policy or wanting to key into government policy. So you need to be abreast with developments and happenings. But before this Federal Civil Service Strategy Implementation Plan 2021 to 2025, there was one that took place. That is the Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plan 2017 to 2020. So that program preceded this particular one we are talking about now. So after that program, they reviewed the program, looked at its performance in relation with the service delivery that we've been talking about. And they talked to stakeholders in the industry. And they interviewed some people, very important people, like former officers, to find out the impact of that particular program on, the way and manner, the civil service carries on. So having looked at it, they discovered there were still some areas that needed improvement, so which culminated in creating a part 2 of the program. That is why this one now, Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plan 2021 to 2025. It's a very serious business because they have to collaborate with even international agencies, development agencies, including the World Bank. And even there is a budget of about 20-something billion naira, to carry out this particular program among the civil service or workers in the federation. So, and here we are. You know that the vision statement of the Federal Civil Service is to create a world-class service for accelerated national development. So if you have to create a world-class service, then it means you have to do something much more than you used to do. There has to be some reforms, So, but you also have to look at the background. What is the background? The background is simply finding a way to sustain the gains of the earlier program, that is Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plans for 2017 to 2020. And also, that's number one. Number two background is that there is this African Agenda 2063. That is an African agenda looking at how the African continent can develop in 50 years' time, how we can live where we are presently to a much more comfortable, standard that is comparable with the world standard. So they are looking for how Africa can be much more integrated, much more peaceful continent than it used to be. And if it has to happen, then the way and manner we do things has to change. There has to be strategic plans. There has to be a deviation from the status quo, in order to achieve growth and sustainable development. So that is where they drew that inspiration. That is where this particular program we are talking about drew its inspiration. It also drew its inspiration from the what we call the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure you must have heard that by the United Nations. Sustainable Development Goals. Before the Sustainable Development Goals, we had what we call the Millennium Development Goals, which stopped around 2015. So after the expiration of that Millennium Development Goals, it had, I think, about 8 agenda, talking about peace and prosperity of nations of the world, with particular attention on the individuals, So after that Millennium Development Goals, we now come into the Sustainable Development Goals, which we are looking at maybe up to 2030, the year 2030. And it has about 17 programs in it. So about 17 programs in it. So the 16th and the 17th number of that Sustainable Development Goal has to do with inclusiveness. Inclusiveness as a concept, of development, as a concept of improvement of service delivery. Because if you are talking of how to improve somebody's performance, you have to engage the person. You have to include the person. If you check the political setting in Nigeria now, we are talking about some inclusiveness in the political agenda. How do we make sure that every part of Nigeria is included in policy evolution, in practicing some of the things that lead to national development? How do we include Mr. A, who is from this other background, and Mr. B from the other background? So another background that gives it, impetus, that is this particular program we are talking about, is the Medium-Term National Development Plan, which is also scheduled for 2021 to 2025. How do we drive growth and development? So the country, the planners, they come out with a particular program on how to build the economy, sustainable economy, through maybe enlarging the agricultural output and entrepreneurship. So, in other words, the civil service should not see itself as an outsider in all of these programs. So what the Office of the Head of Civil Service did was to plan a program along these lines to see how we can key in order to be part of the development plan that the nation's administration, is plans from time to time. So that is how we came to this particular platform. So the Office of the Head of Civil Service had to ask itself, what is our role? How can we, be part of these agendas, these Africa 2063 or what? These sustainable development goals, this medium-term economic plan. How, in what area can we, be relevant to the success of the de facto government? So it looked at several things, interventions in the public service. What are the elements in terms of leadership? Because when you talk of leadership, you are not just talking about leadership in the political sector. You should also be talking about leadership in the public service. Because the public service is not out of this environment. It is not existing independent of this particular political environment. So it talks about issues like transformative leadership in the public service. How do we utilize the human resource that we have? How can public officers, be responsive to the needs of the citizens? How do we respond? How do we help in meeting the needs of the people? And then, what are the ethical standards we need to, uphold so that we can become more effective? So these are just some of the questions that we begin to ask ourselves. And remember that the basics for all of this is to change the way and manner the public service runs. And that is the target. And that is why the Office of the Head of Civil Service conducted stakeholders engagement. They engaged the stakeholders, people outside of the public service, to see a way that the public service environment can be a lot more productive, a lot more beneficial to the nation's economy. And so they asked themselves, what did we do in the past? Were they functional? Did they work? What can we do presently to enable them to work? So they conducted a lot of interviews. Past head of service, they met them, find out their own opinion about the public service, and even they conducted workshops and seminars. It's just that we have not been following events. These things have been happening. All of this. They met labor unions, to find out what can be done to help the public service become more relevant. So in that previous program of 2017 to 2020, they discovered some loopholes, and they also learned some lessons. So, what are we talking about? when we now enter into Federal Civil Service implementation, strategic implementation, is we want to look at the body, the structure, that will help us to really understand what we want to do, or what the Office of the Head of Civil Service wants to do. Now, we have some kind of a structure, like a building. It's in this way. We have the roof, we have the walls, and then we have the foundation. If you look at the roof, what we call the strategic resource, we'll be looking at improved staff competencies and skills. Improved staff competencies and skills. We have improved productivity and HR administration. Then we have result-based performance, and we have innovation. We also have digital transformation. These are the expected results. Now we look at what will help us to achieve all of this. We talk about the capacity building. We talk about the performance management system. We talk about the IPIS, human resource. We talk about innovation, and then digitalization, and staff welfare. Now, if you look at them one by one, when it talks first of all of capacity building, talking about training, there is a need to constantly train the staff. There is a need to bring them to understand the current trend in events. Because as a professional, as wherever you find yourself in, whatever training you have, there's always an update. There's always an improvement. There's nobody that if you discover that if you graduated 5, 6, 7 years ago, the project you wrote might be outdated, because between then and now there has been improvements, changes that have occurred as a result of cultural factors, environmental factors, and whatever. So if you want to be relevant, remain relevant, you need to understand what has taken place between then and now. So that is the essence of training and retraining. So it is one of the things that will help us to accomplish this goal between 2021 and 2025. Now, if you talk of performance management system, that's the new way of rating of performance. In the civil service, we always have this APA, Annual Performance Evaluation Report. But the new plan is suggesting that method of rating has become outdated. It is no longer in tune with modern times. It's no longer in tune with current trend in assessment of performance. You know, that upper form where you have somebody will sit down somewhere and rate the staff 8 over 10, 9 over 10, without even seeing the staff, without monitoring the performance of the staff. So there are components that are to be built in to, to properly rate the staff and be able to establish his actual productivity as related to the work schedule that he or she has been given. So it's a very similar something to the American standard of rating. That's why sometimes you find some people, they have wonderful degrees, but they cannot perform to justify the degree that they have acquired. Why? Because their performance rating was based on their ability to, memorize, as it were, what they were able to put back, garbage in, garbage out system. So once they memorize it and they dish it out and they score 80%. So meanwhile, there is somebody else who may have scored about 60% in his overall degree, but his day-to-day output, his day-to-day performance, you can see that there is an improvement. There is a justification of the particular work that he has been given. So this new strategy is talking about deviation from this normal way of rating officers and adopting a system that is in conformity to the world standard. And you also talk about IP's human resource, that IP's, integrated payroll, whatever, performance. What is it now? Integrated payroll, personnel information system. That is not just about salary, it has to also rate, know the number of staff, where they are, what they do. The human resource component is now relevant, is now needful, to also help in the productivity of that organization. So unlike before, when it's just a question of just pay salaries, but from there also you can monitor the performance. You can monitor the performance of the organization, knowing the staff who are on ground, knowing the staff who are not on ground, knowing their exit times and all of that. So the human resource component has become a key aspect, in this particular strategic implementation plan for 2021 to 2025. And also you talk of innovation is one other thing. The public service is to be seen to be innovating, not staying in one place or stationary. We don't want to have a stationary civil service. We want to have a mobile and dynamic, civil service, a pragmatic civil service that is working based on world's best practices. That the world, they have standards. They have standards. Even in management systems, there are standards for management systems. As the International Standard Organization, the management system is also a component that can be rated for any organization. So we need to be seen to be also measuring up to those standards, and if possible, getting standardizations from world bodies. And that is what the Japanese, they call it Kaizen, continuous improvement. Not being satisfied on one spot, making effort to shift grounds through different means. It can be through personal development, it can be through training, it can be through whatever. Anything that will help you to shift ground, to go beyond where you are presently, is innovation. That means you have to be innovative. Think of ways, better ways of doing things. How can we do things better in order to effect proper service delivery, that is in conformity with modern requirements? Because the world is digital. I mean, you cannot continue in the analog setting. So you need something digital in order to comply and be able to get the system moving. So that's why the next one talks about digitalization, the content. How do you digitalize the content services? Service delivery can be digitalized. It means you have to looking for modern technical ways of doing things. I mean, where we are now suggests that we are still backward when we are dealing with files, physical files. Others are dealing with archived, files where they can operate from different places. It means that I can access your file from my laptop here. I can access the files of people in Lagos from my laptop. If we get to that level, I don't have to wait until I get the physical file and begin to look through it before I treat a matter that has to do with you. You can apply on your laptop, whatever you want to apply for leave. You just type it there, and it gets to the HR manager, who will now, forward it to the relevant desk officer to treat. So that is the civil service that we are looking at. And then it's talked about staff welfare. What are the ways of creating more, impact on the organization's productivity? Is it not by looking at the welfare of the staff? Stuff like National Health Insurance Scheme, housing, and you know that the Office of the Head of Civil Service, they've been talking about housing for staff. There's one program called FISH, Federal Integrated Staff Housing Scheme, where staff can key in and have their own houses through mortgage arrangement. So then, after looking at all of this, what are the things that will enable all of this to happen? We call them enablers. What are the things? The thoughts of leadership and coordination. Those are the things that will, enable this performance. Leadership and coordination. You have to have effective leadership for you to perform, for you to get results. We also have culture change. Culture change is where people are willing to change from the way they do things. There has to be, a shift. When we talk of culture, you already know that it is a way of life, a way of doing things. But now when you add change to it, it means that change, that culture is going to be disrupted. So if a system that cannot accept disruption of its system cannot be dynamic, cannot be result-oriented, it's going to remain traditional. It's going to remain a cake. So there will be no room for dynamism or pragmatism, because like what there is a particular set of people in literature in some time, they call them avant-gardes. Avant-gardes were people who decided to deviate from the norm, the way of writing things. They decided to change it completely because they felt that it didn't take care of all the development, all the cultural development that were happening, within their society. So the culture change is also needed in the public service in order to change the mentality, the orientation of staff, the way they do things, in order to achieve a better result. You cannot expect a different result if you keep doing things the same way. So that's the enabler, the culture change, which also has to do with change management. It's a difficult thing to change the way people do things. The most difficult thing. But you also have to learn how to manage that change so that it will not be too drastic, and so that people will not become, lose interest in that particular change. It takes only a very good manager, who can relate and engage the staff to be able to accomplish that. It will also include partnership. As a public service, we are no longer limited to the civil service. You have to build bridges across, the society. You have to find out people who can share your dream. And that is why the Federal Civil Service Implementation Plan for 2021 to 2025, you have the World Bank as part of the enablers, and other agencies or development partners, that can buy into that your dream and purpose. So you also have data and analytics. So these are things that you will need to use. Data and analysis, that's the digital skills, for you to be able to accomplish all of this. Remember the training, the performance management, the human resource, the innovation, and all of that. So we also have a conducive work environment needs to be created, in order for that to happen. And this is what we call ergonomics of the workplace. And the ergonomics of the workplace has to do with the facilities that are available to the worker to make his work much more effective and productive. For instance, if you have a chair and a table that is not comfortable, there is every possibility that you will not be productive as required. Okay? It means you may not be sitting properly when you are writing. It means you may not be able to look at your work too properly. So we also have effective communication is one of the key enablers that will help, to achieve this strategic plan that we are talking about. And that is why I have taken the initiative of, bringing you on board to kind of sensitize you on what we are doing. Because if there is a way of passing information, there is a triangular approach of passing information. You have the coder, you have the decoder, and then you have the message, and then you have the decoder. So these are the three aspects of effective communication. It means the messenger has a message, and for us to know that there is an understanding of the message, the person who got the message must be able to act in such a way as to show that he understood. And that is where we will now talk about feedback mechanism. At the end of the day, when any of you is asked about the Federal Civil Service implementation, Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plan 2021 to 2025, you may not give all the answers, but at least you can give him or her an idea of what it is, the aim of that particular, program. So these are, and then we also have the funding aspect. Is very key to enabling, productivity. So this is the bottom line of what we are talking about. And the Office of the Head of the Civil Service expects that this information should reach every staff. The staff should be conscious of this new move, this new direction that it is taking. And if there is a way that can be promoted, like use of jingles, like flyers, like, some kind of banner to show that there is a new consciousness in place now, so as to bring every civil servant, to the point of culture change, a point of departure, so that we can begin to do things differently in order to get a different result. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.